First, guys, just drink it in. Drink it in. What used to be is gone. Behold, God is doing a new thing. I've cut all of my ridiculous hair. So maybe you can focus a little bit more on the wise things that I'm saying to you. Okay, a couple of things right at the outset of this sermon that I want to address. First of all, I want to let you know that I am mourning, I am grieving, I am sad and frustrated about the loss of the adult, co-ed, non-competitive, competitive, recreational church kickball team, and the fact that we will not have a season in the summer of 2020. That pains me. And in honor of what certainly would have been a championship season, I am tipping my cap to Coach, to our new recruits, to our veterans who were ready and poised, I might say, to bring home the trophy for the very first time.
Last week of the regular season, all right? Yeah! It's been fun. All right. Hey, let's play tonight. 1, 2, 3,
I want to honor you, and I also wanted to make sure that I did so by wearing our 2019 team third place jersey. I think we won third place. We should have won the whole thing, but that's a different issue altogether. I also wanted to go ahead and let you know that right now as you're watching this video, if you're watching it on Sunday, right now, Kate and I are off celebrating our 12th anniversary. And by off celebrating, I mean we're probably in our living room watching a show with our 2 beautiful children. Kate is the love of my life. She is beautiful. She's an entrepreneur. She's a businesswoman. She's caring. She's smart. She's funny. She's a great cook. She's also a pretty good gardener. We've got an oversized garden in our backyard right now due to her. She's also very handy with a set of tools, which is good because I don't know anything about tools. One time I was trying to find a word for a certain tool, and I said, it's the one that's drill. Yes, I know that now, but Kate has helped me immensely with that. She's also stood beside me in the midst of some really ridiculous endeavors, such as getting a PhD, planting a church, being a pastor to a bunch of really beautiful and smart, intelligent, but also sort of lovingly crazy people like yourselves. Just wear that as a badge of honor. Smart, beautiful, intelligent, but sort of lovingly crazy. Kate does a lot for this community that goes unnoticed. She's behind the scenes, and she's also my biggest champion, and I am thrilled to be her husband. So hats off to you also, Kate. May you also soak in the beauty of this 2019 TRP, adult, recreational, competitive, non-competitive kickball team. I appreciate that. Okay, so we have been talking about Habakkuk, and I know I've already mentioned that this is a sermon, although, guys, I'll be honest, preaching in the midst of quarantine is hard and weird, and I don't often know what to do with it. I know that you've heard that from me, and I don't want to be the type that just makes concessions for what's about to happen, but consider this concessed, okay? This has nothing to do with quarantine. This has nothing to do with probably many of the problems that you are facing in your life, but I'm hopeful, as I often am, that it will be meaningful in some way. The passage that we're looking at tonight from the book of Habakkuk is well known, although I would say it's well known specifically through the lens of Paul, the way that Paul uses this passage. In fact, a lot of commentators would say that Paul completely misuses this text from Habakkuk for his own ends. Now, I'm not going to go that far, but I will say that, yeah, a lot of times, New Testament authors, Paul included, really jack up an understanding of the Old Testament because they're reading through the lenses of Jesus, through his death and his resurrection, and all of the things that have changed in light of that. They can do nothing but see Jesus littered throughout the pages of the Old Testament. Now, if we're going to read this text well, it's not about I was about to say it's not about Jesus. It is about Jesus, but Habakkuk was not writing a prophetic, messianic text, but it became a prophetic and messianic text when Jesus shows up. Okay, I think that's fair to say. Now, if we're going to understand this passage at all, we have to remind ourselves of the book that we're looking at and the surrounding context. Now, Habakkuk is one of the minor prophets. I would encourage you not to think of Habakkuk or any of the other 11 minor prophets as minor in the sense of the scope of their mission or the words that they are saying. You could really think that they are the smaller prophetic books that we have in the Bible compared to Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, which are mammoth. They are some of the biggest books in the Old Testament. They're large and they have lots of prophecies within them. Okay, Habakkuk is different. It's 3 chapters. It's really small. It's focused on one issue. It's an interchange between the prophet and God, as we will see in a moment, and it's really dealing with one specific thing. Just for your excited information, the minor prophets are also known at times by the moniker the Book of the 12, because these 12 minor prophets are collected and grouped together in some ancient manuscripts, although scholars don't really know what that means or how to read them as a collection, as a unity. Some scholars have been attempting to do this really over the last 20 or 30 years, giving a lot of attention to how these books are arranged and how they are in communication with one another, but that's not our issue today. As we have talked already about the book of Habakkuk, it is an interchange between the prophet and God, and it's really surrounding an issue where the prophet looks around and sees an impending threat, possibly from the Babylonian Empire. At this time, the Neo-Babylonians, this new Babylonian Empire, is sort of surging and getting ready to overtake the former world empire, the Assyrians, who were in an alliance with Egypt. And both of these empires, if you will, together, these political kingdoms together, they were ruling over Judah in the south. So Judah kind of found itself in this weird mix of, do we trust Assyria and Egypt? Do we trust Babylon? Do we just kind of fend for ourselves? What do we do? And as Habakkuk is looking around, he's seeing violence and he's seeing injustice, and he's calling God to task, saying, what is going on here? This is why I think that this book is pertinent for our moment in history, because as we look around, we see violence, we see injustice, we see all sorts of issues that probably also cause us to say in our prayers of petition, violence, injustice, what, God, are you doing? When will you act? When will you bring about your justice in these situations? And this is what Habakkuk is saying. This is how he introduces the book. God responds in verses 5 through 11, I think, in the first chapter. Although Habakkuk hates the response. God says, I'm rousing up the Babylonians and they're going to take care of everything. And Habakkuk basically says, what? Why are you doing that? Why are you bringing up this wicked, evil empire to go and to take care of your business? That doesn't seem to be how you work. And as Habakkuk is ending his second plea or his second petition, his response to God's initial response, it ends by saying, I will stand at my watchpost. I will station myself on the ramparts. I will keep watch to see what God will say to me and what God will answer concerning my complaint. This is where we left off last time, where Habakkuk is waiting for God to speak. We don't know how long it takes, but we do know that God responds. And this is the section of the text that we will be looking at this evening, God's second response. So we have Habakkuk, God, Habakkuk, now God. And this is leading us to the resolution of this book. Although, as you'll see, there's not really a good resolution to this book, at least here, because it might be one of the more confusing passages in the Old Testament. Now that's clearly a bit exaggerated, but there's no small amount of problems in this text, okay? This is what it says. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. The word of God for the people of God. This passage it's got some difficulties here. You could even just start going through these verses and I'll point them out to you. The Lord answers Habakkuk, and we don't know the amount of time between Habakkuk stationing himself on the ramparts, waiting for God to speak, and when God actually does speak. But the Lord does answer, and this is what God says: write the vision. We don't know what the vision is. It's not really clear in this passage. It's not even really clear in the book, which is a problem, because the vision is what is to give Habakkuk and readers really a sense of hope, a sense of trust in what God will do. Remember, it says it's a vision for the appointed time. We don't know what time that is. It speaks of the end. We don't know which end it's referring to. It does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. Wait for this vision, because in it you will find hope. It will surely come. It will not delay. What God says to Habakkuk that God will do will in fact happen. We just don't know what it is. Now, if you have come into either this experience of participating in a sermon, and if you've spent any amount of time at TRP, I know this is not the case. I know it. But if you happen to have stumbled upon us for the very first time, you might be bringing with you this understanding of what the Bible is. And one of the things that inevitably we think the Bible is clear. We think that the Bible is easily understood, and that's not always the case. When you get your hands dirty in actually reading the text, it is a lot more difficult than sometimes we allow it to be. And any scholar that's looking at this passage will say something very similar to this. Let me read you a little bit here. This is specifically on verse 4, but this is J.J.M. Roberts, which you know he's a scholar. If you have three initials and one of them is not your last name, you are a emerging scholar or an old scholar. Either way, J.J.M. Roberts taught at Princeton for a long time. He may still be there. But he says this of verse 4: the textual difficulties in this verse make it difficult to characterize the response of God with any degree of certainty. Any interpretation of this response will be clouded by a certain amount of hypothetical guesswork. Now, he's just talking about verse 4, which we will get to, but I honestly think you could expand that to include this entire response from God, because it's littered with issues that are at least up for debate. Write the vision. Well, what's the vision? Make it plain on tablets. This is much less of an issue, but stone tablets, wooden tablets, we don't know. And more weighty, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. Well, what does that mean? Because when you first hear that, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it, you're thinking of someone running around a track, perhaps, and they hold up a sign. I was just watching Ford versus Ferrari the other day, and Matt Damon's character was trying to give advice to Christian Bale's character, who was driving a car, and as he's going around the track at like 180 to 200 miles an hour, he holds up a sign that says, push it past 7,000 RPMs, or something like that, I forget. And so you might be thinking of someone who's running around a track, and the sign is so clear that even if they're running fast, they can read it, and that's what is being said here. But most scholars would say that seems strange and not really what is happening, even though the NRSV seems to insinuate that that is what is being claimed in this text. Again, Robert says, the text certainly does not mean that someone running down the street need not stop in order to read the inscription. Another scholar, Will Gaffney, says, are the letters to be large and plain so someone running by can read it like a billboard? That makes little sense, she says, given the fact that people read aloud just as they prayed aloud. Running and reading aloud, she says, do not seem like a good mix. And if you're thinking, well, I could run and read aloud, then okay, fine. But I think you're missing the point that this probably isn't what the passage is talking about. Instead, you could turn it around and say that the reader finds refuge in the vision. So it's not so that a runner might read it, the tablets, but it's so that a reader might run in it, the vision. See what just happened there? So the referent of what it is probably not the tablets, but the it is the vision, and the reader will run in the vision, meaning they will have such a sense of hope and trust and faith and security because of what the vision says that they will be able to run. They will not be inhibited in any way whatsoever. This message, this vision, this hope will provide them with everything that they need to continue on in the midst of their brokenness. This is not just write this down so that somebody running around a track would be able to read it. It's when you write this down and when you make it plain, anyone who does in fact read it, they will run because of what it says. It will be their source of hope and comfort and trust. You know what I'm saying? So there we've had to do a little bit of interpretive work in this passage to see what it's saying to connect some of these dots. Now, verse 3 again, it goes on to say there's still a vision for the appointed time. Don't know what it is. It speaks of the end. You don't know what the end is. The end of the Babylonian Empire, the end of the Judean kingdom, the end of the period of waiting. We don't know necessarily what's happening here, but we do know that this vision and what it entails, even if we don't know its contents, it will surely come. It will not delay, and we are to wait for it and place our trust in it. Now, verse 4, remember, this is what Roberts did say was so confusing. It says, look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them. It's difficult to know to know really what this contrast is between the righteous and what comes before. Most scholars don't really know if it is in fact someone who who is proud, if it's someone who would fit the bill of the wicked. We don't necessarily know, but we know what they are doing is in contrast to what the righteous person is doing. And now here is where your balloon, I might stick a pin in it and some of the air might leak out a bit, because we know this line, the righteous shall live by not their faith, as the NRSV says, but we know it through the eyes of Paul, who says the righteous will live by faith. And the way that we often interpret that is, for us as Christians, the righteous, us, the justified, us, we will live by the faith that we have in Jesus. And oftentimes the way that is described is we will live by our mental and intellectual assent that we have placed in these handful of items that reside on a statement of faith or that have been extracted from the Bible, that we say, in order to be a Christian, you must believe X, Y, and Z. You must believe, for instance, that we are sinful people, that we deserve a punishment, that punishment is death followed by hell, that Jesus, who is righteous, stepped in and took that punishment for us. And if we believe in Jesus, then we are not heading for hell, but we are heading for heaven. If we believe these things, we are told, then we will be saved. Then we will be Christians. That's not what this passage is talking about. And actually, a lot of scholars think that Paul has completely misread this passage. Now, I'm going to pump the brakes here a little bit. I'm going to pump the brakes here on that one a little bit, because I think that Paul is a bit more intelligent than we give him credit for oftentimes. And I know that there might be some feminist folks in the crowd that are beginning to throw tomatoes at the screen, whatever. Just calm down. Hold on. Stick with me here. I will go on record. I will go on record. If you have a ledger somewhere, you can write this down, that I said this, that oftentimes New Testament authors, and Paul included, will jack up an Old Testament text because they're reading through a different interpretive lens altogether. Jesus has changed everything, so they cannot do anything but see Jesus all throughout the pages of the Old Testament, where the Old Testament authors were not expecting Jesus to be, where the Old Testament authors were not even expecting a Messiah to be, where the Old Testament authors were not thinking that anything was speaking about the future. In fact, sometimes they were speaking about the past, but the New Testament authors say, that's a Jesus passage. Paul does this a lot. The gospel authors do this a lot. It happens a lot throughout the New Testament. But I do think that we can understand Paul understanding Habakkuk rightly if we understand Habakkuk rightly. This passage is not saying that the righteous will live by faith, that they will live by their mental and intellectual assent. This word here for faith, in fact, it very rarely at all means faith. It means faithfulness. The word occurs 49 times in the Hebrew Bible, and more often than not, by a overwhelming majority, it means faithfulness or steadfastness or trustworthiness, something to that effect. So here, if we understand that, the NRSV looking at it would say, but the righteous will live by not their faith and the mental assent and the intellectual assent, but by their faithfulness. The righteous will live and contrast themselves with the proud, maybe, or the wicked, maybe, by being faithful in the midst of uncertainty. They will live by being faithful in the midst of impending doom and danger. Remember the context of this book. The Neo-Babylonian Empire is on the rise. They're about to, if they have not already, destroy Assyria and Egypt, and just leaving Judah in the lurch there. They're gonna destroy Judah too. in 586. But here, what this vision is to do is to inspire people to wait, to trust, and to continue to live faithfully. Now, when we look at Paul and how Paul understands this, he too is not thinking that we should just place our faith in all of these things that Jesus did in the sense of checking off the boxes. Yep, I believe that Jesus was the Son of God. Yep, I believe that Jesus was sinless. Yep, I believe that I am sinful. Yep, I believe that I am one who should inherit death and hell. Yep, I am one who believes that Jesus has stepped in for me to take that punishment away, and if I just believe in him, then I will be saved. Yep, and now that's just that. This is not what Paul is saying at all. In fact, there's a huge controversy within scholarship as to whose faithfulness is Paul talking about. If the righteous will live by faithfulness, is it our faithfulness and the way that we live out our belief in Jesus, our trust in Jesus, our hope in Jesus? Or do the righteous live by the faithful acts of the faithful one, Jesus? There's all sorts of things that we can examine about these two passages. But really, I think that if we're wanting to understand Habakkuk well, he is instructed to write the vision that will give hope and that will produce trust and faith, and to write it so plain on the tablets that when one sees it and reads it, that they will run, that their refuge and their strength will be found in this message of hope. If it seems to tarry, God says, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. The righteous, they live in faithfulness. The righteous live in the midst of waiting and hoping and trusting. And for Paul too, when he looks at this passage, he kind of typifies the Christian experience by saying, we also are waiting. We also are trusting. We also are hoping. And now the cool thing about this is when we embody righteousness, when we embody the righteousness that has already, catch it, already been embodied in Jesus, we live in light of his faithfulness. We live in light of the death and the resurrection, the ascension of Jesus. We live in light of the promises that we have because of who Jesus is. We live in light of that. And it's not contrasting faith in the sense of our intellectual attainment of these ideas and the proud. It's instead contrasting the proud with the one who lives their life in response to the things that they in fact believe. Let me see here. Will Gaffney says, the description of the proud and the puffed up that contrasts with the righteous in Habakkuk 2:5, it centers on what they do, not on what they believe. Now, I don't want to sit here and diminish the things that we believe. I don't want to say that they're unimportant, because they are very important. Paul himself would say something similar to that. But I also wonder if Paul, instead of thinking about our statement of faith and the boxes that we check in order to believe that we are in, I wonder if he'd be horrified by that. Because our job, our calling as followers of Jesus, the thing that we actually are inviting people into, is to live out our sense of trust and hope by trusting in the faithfulness of Jesus. And by living, not just believing, but living in light of that. So the things that we say, and the things that we do, and the people that we love, and the way that we enact our Christian beliefs. They demonstrate how we are choosing to trust in the faithfulness of Jesus. We too are still waiting, like Habakkuk's audience and Habakkuk himself. We too are waiting for these things to come to pass. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. And the things that we have staked our lives on, the things that we believe, it's not to be left there. It's to be enacted. It's a love that is sacrificial. It's a love of neighbor that can be evidenced in the real world. It's a trust in Jesus that impacts how we choose to live. I'm hopeful that even as we hear these ancient words from an ancient prophet, that we would understand them to be the embodiment of our faith. The righteous will live by the faithfulness of Jesus. The righteous will live in light of what Jesus has done. The righteous will not just believe things about Jesus, but they will act and they will do and they will embody faithfulness to a faithful God. Wherever you are and however you are listening to this, I would encourage you that we have the opportunity to do that in our lives in small ways and in large ways. I would encourage you to begin to enact your commitments to Jesus. Do not just believe the things, do the things. Do not just place your faith in Jesus, but be faithful to the faithful one, and let that be evidenced by all.